Okay, so when you read something that just challenges a really fundamental assumption, maybe one you didn't even realize you had.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of what happened when we started digging into this document.
Yeah.
Cultural Dissonance 2025.pdf.
Mm-hmm.
It hints at, well, potentially a huge difference in how Eastern cultures, specifically Chinese culture here, and Western cultures understand, well, what drives our core values.
That's right. And our mission in this deep dive is really to explore the ideas from the author, who states they have 50 years of cross-cultural research and experience behind this, a lot of background.
50 years, yeah. And they argue there's this significant blind spot in how the West understands China.
A colossal ignorance is the phrase used, I believe, specifically about the heart-based or maybe conscience-based nature of Chinese culture.
Right. And they directly contrast that with the influence of Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam on Western thinking. It's a pretty bold claim to start with.
It is. It really sets the stage. The author's main idea, the central thesis, is that the West hasn't really grasped the depth of this Chinese conscience.
And that it comes from within, like internal moral values.
Exactly. Not from, say, external religious doctrines or commandments. That's the core distinction they keep coming back to.
They even point way back to 1492, suggesting this lack of awareness isn't new.
Yeah, like it's a historical blind spot that's persisted for centuries. Like we've been sort of missing a key piece of the cultural puzzle.
Okay, and then there's this idea about religionization. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. So the author argues that the West has basically misinterpreted key Chinese value systems, things like Confucianism, Taoism, even Buddhism, as practiced there.
How so?
By adding the suffix ism, the argument goes, we've turned these philosophies of, well, self-cultivation and how to relate to others into religions in the Western sense, maybe implying deities where there aren't any.
Ah, I see. So the author's saying these are fundamentally about developing inner moral character, inner values?
Precisely. Not about worshiping external gods. It's about ethics from within. The author really hammers this point home. It's vital to understanding the difference, in their view.
Which leads to this distinction they make between cultures, plural, and the unique Chinese civilization.
Right. They argue this Chinese civilization is deeply rooted specifically in these non-religious ethical frameworks. Stuff developed way back, starting around the Zhou dynasty and with Confucius.
So a long, independent moral tradition, not reliant on religious revelation in the same way.
That's the core argument. Now, about that visual metaphor they use, the CS Cultura sphere.
Yeah, the shapes.
Yeah.
The round one, the square, the triangle. What's that about?
Okay, so the round shape is meant to represent like a healthy give-and-take relationship, reciprocity.
Okay.
The square shape represents doubt, hesitation and interaction, maybe suspicion.
Right.
But that sideways triangle, the one that looks a bit like a spear point, that symbolizes a hostile or invasive interaction.
And how does this relate to the core argument?
Well, the author suggests that if the West doesn't grasp this heart or conscience-based cultural foundation, its actions or approaches might unintentionally come across as, well, spear-like, aggressive or invasive, even if not intended.
Because the fundamental assumptions about interaction are different.
Exactly. You might be approaching it purely logically or legally, while the other side is operating from a deeply felt sense of maybe moral obligation or relational harmony. Misunderstandings are almost inevitable then.
Okay, this is fascinating. Then the author predicts a kind of renaissance.
Yeah.
A Chinese cultural renaissance.
Yes. Driven by this inherent human conscience, they actually foresee this leading to greater ethical competence within the culture.
And that has practical effects.
Apparently so. The author links this rise in ethical competence directly to increased transparency and efficiency. It's like saying a strong inner moral compass actually makes society function better, practically speaking.
That is a different way to think about societal progress. Not just laws and regulations, but internal values driving efficiency.
It's definitely a thought-provoking connection they're making.
So wrapping up, the author really urges the West to, what was the phrase, rethink and reconsider its own viewpoint.
Yes, specifically its monotheistic cultural box, as they put it. And they suggest there might be something to learn from the Chinese perspective, crucially, with zero political clauses.
Zero political clauses. Interesting. So purely about cultural understanding.
That seems to be the emphasis. It's a direct challenge to look beyond familiar frameworks. The core takeaway is this stark contrast. Western values often influenced by external religious frameworks, by an internal, cultivated conscience.
Right. Okay, so something for you, the listener, to think about here. Considering this perspective, this idea of value systems rooted in conscience, not necessarily external doctrines, how might understanding that influence your own approach, both in ethical choices and maybe how you engage across different cultures?
It certainly gives you a different lens to look through, doesn't it?
Definitely something to mull over.